Women and girls placed sacred objects into them.
Indigenous women today are left vulnerable and targeted.
It is the loss of your family.
Patriarchal colonialism, the European policies and laws for creating gender segregation of colonized bodies, conforming to the Western gender ideology that men are superior to domestic subordinate women. Women in pre-colonial North America were honored for their roles in nurturing and giving life. They were known to teach children to fish and hunt and were seen as the heads of their families. They were the ones responsible for the upbringing of children and made important decisions about war. They also decided who could become a member of the clan and how to distribute wealth. When European settlers came to North America, they imposed their Western gender roles on these Indigenous women. Settlers looked down on women and insisted only on dealing with men. This idea that men were superior to women resulted in power being stripped away from these Indigenous women. The Indian Act of 1876 reinforced these patriarchal ideas among Indigenous women. Patriarchy took away roles women had as leaders and heads of their household, and ultimately gave men all the power in society. Women had virtually no rights under this act. This would lead to a long period of sexism and discrimination against Aboriginal women for decades to come.
The introduction of patriarchy that was enforced by the Europeans led to diminishing power and resources available to the Indigenous women in Canada. According to the Indian Act, if an Indian woman married a non-Indian man, she was not entitled to be registered, and therefore she and the children of the marriage were denied Indian status. From the government's perspective, these women had assimilated. If a woman married an Indian from another reserve, the act stated that she must follow her husband and relinquish her band membership in order to become a member of his band. If her husband died or if she divorced him, she could not return to her reserve as she was no longer a member. In contrast, an Indian man who married a non-Indian woman not only retained his Indian status, but the non-Indian woman would gain status under the act, as would their children. Indian women were denied the right to vote in band elections, to hold elected office, or to participate in public meetings. However, Indian men had none of those restrictions. If a woman's husband became enfranchised, automatically she and their children were also enfranchised, regardless if they want to or not. An Indian male that was enfranchised was eligible to receive an allotment of land, whereas his wife was not. If her enfranchised husband died first, the land went to their children. The widow of an enfranchised man could only regain Indian status and band membership through marriage to another Indian man. By taking away women's official status as Indians, the government advanced its goal of reducing the number of Indigenous people who had Indian status. Between 1958 and 1968 alone, more than 100,000 women and children lost their Indian status as a result of these provisions.
Many here question if it could possibly go far enough to bring justice for the families and keep women safe. Indigenous women face a murder rate 6 times the national average.
Colonization can be defined as a policy or set of policies and practices where political power from one territory exerts control in a different territory, which involves unequal power revelation. Colonial policies and practices tried to end Indigenous beliefs, customs, language, and culture. These attempts specifically had negative effects on Indigenous women's roles in society and their ideologies of feminism. Colonization continues to have ongoing impacts for Indigenous women across North America, and a variety of long-term effects have been created from these colonial practices. There has been a creation of unequal power based on differences in order to justify unequal rights, and it has affected every single Indigenous woman across North America in different aspects. Indigenous women experience the highest rates of poverty, violence, and poor health in North America today. Sexism, racism, and colonialism continue to erode Indigenous gender ideologies and sexualities. All of these factors have led to not only an increase in missing Indigenous women, but an increase in their death rate across North America. To this day, Indigenous women continue to push in order to regain at least some of the power they had lost before colonial times and to once again be viewed as equals to men.
Between 1980 and 2012, the RCMP in 2014 has acknowledged that there were over 1,200 women missing and murdered. However, Indigenous women's groups stated that there were over 4,000 missing and murdered women. The reason for this is the lack of reports, ineffective database, and the failure to identify the ethnicities of women in cases like these. In addition, Indigenous women ages 15 years or older will experience abuse 3.5 times more likely than non-Indigenous women. Between 1997 to 2000, the rate of homicide for Indigenous women is 7 times more likely than non-Indigenous women. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky apologizes for the lack of support from the police and changed the cadet training curriculum to focus more on Indigenous people. The Me Too movement involved women who advocated against sexual assault and abuse among other women. Although this included all ethnicities, Indigenous women used the hashtag #MeToo on social media to gain attention to the world to hope to reduce assault towards their people. The MMIWG refers to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In honor of the memory of those who are missing and murdered, there are arts that are shared to the world, some that are eerie but symbolize deep meanings. There is also the Red Dress Project, which is a public art installation that expresses the grief of the victims. Due to patriarchal colonization in the past, Indigenous women today still suffer from prejudice and violence. Many Indigenous women experienced or experience assault in their daily lives and seek justice for their sisters.